I recently had the once-in-a-lifetime chance to fish a lake that is thousands of years old. The Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles long, roughly 7 miles wide, and goes down to about 150 feet, but more of that later. Join me on my trip across Jerusalem, where we get to explore some of the amazing historical sites, walk the winding cobbled streets, and even spend most of our time sleeping in a bomb shelter. Despite Israel being in the middle of a war with Palestine, this was one opportunity that I couldn't turn down, and I made the 2,500 mile trip with excitement, not knowing what was in store. As we made our way from the airport, it became apparent very quickly this was just like any other city, and the driving here actually made London seem very civilised. We had to spend a lot of time avoiding the usual tourist chaps, but did find some interesting locals, some big and some small. Managed to get my hands on some of the local currency in case of any emergencies, and took my time just taking in some of the surroundings. As you wind through the streets, you're met with an impressive array of tall, modern buildings, right next to neglected, abandoned historical structures. And the closer you get to the old city, the more apparent this becomes. Despite having a large mix of culture and religions, this is a nation proud of its heritage and history. Our first stop was up the long winding hill up to the Mount of Beatitudes. This mountain has huge historical significance and overlooks the Sea of Galilee. It was a fascinating place to just take everything in, and we managed to get there early enough before the crowds of tourists arrived. Citrus trees line the paths that lead down to the viewing points across the water. We drove down the mountain and along the lake path down to an area called Tiberias, which is where our hotel was for the night. The early morning wake up was met with some incredible views across the water. Galilee is the world's lowest freshwater lake at approximately 210 metres below sea level. It was difficult not to just stand in awe of these surroundings, and for an angler, I couldn't help but dream of what sort of fish lay in the depths. I took some time to meet some of the locals who were more than happy to say hello, and sampling some of the local food didn't disappoint either. Wherever you look, there are evidences of architectural artistry, and even some of the doors to the buildings are sights in themselves. Tucked away on a lot of the side streets are the small independent artists, some dating back generations, like this Jerusalem pottery store. In the old city, you're never too far from a wine bar or a coffee house, although the local coffee is a bit of an acquired taste. Areas of historical significance can be found everywhere you look. The old city of Jerusalem is divided into 4 quarters: the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Jewish quarter, and the Armenian quarter. The Western Wall is a significant site to visit and can be found in the northeast corner of the Jewish quarter. In case you're confused, this clip has not been reversed. It's Jewish custom not to turn your back on the wall. Its significance remains until this day as the only remaining wall from the Second Temple built in 19 BC. Not far from here, the narrow, steep, winding streets are full of touristy shops selling everything from small cheap trinkets to local historical finds. We got a tour through the local Armenian community. It was amazing to see how old but how clean this area was. Outside the walls, the evidences of the close communities all mixing together becomes very apparent. Walking between the quarters gives you a glimpse into the different cultures here, as the Christian, Muslim, Jewish and Armenian communities all have something different on offer. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is noted to be the tomb where the body of Jesus was laid and can be found in the Christian Quarter. Inside, people queue up to see the stone where the body of Jesus was said to lay, and religious services are held regularly. As we left, the evening streets became eerily quiet and deserted. The city of David can be found outside the old city, below the Jewish quarter. It dates back at least 3,000 years and overlooks the Kidron Valley, and in the top left the world's oldest cemetery. This cemetery, based on the Mount of Olives, contains hundreds of thousands of bodies, and plots cost anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000. People are dying to get in. Within the city of David itself, the excavated structural remains are obvious. Each area contains helpful notes and explains what they believe it was used for. Below the city you can find Hezekiah's Tunnel, a series of narrow tunnels spanning 530 metres, carved out in 701 BC to protect the city's water source from the Gihon Spring. On the Mount of Olives you can find the Church of the Paternoster. This is said to be the original location where Jesus gave his disciples the Lord's Prayer. You can find the Lord's Prayer written in over 140 languages across the many walls and corridors of this church. As you follow your way down the Mount of Olives, you pass the cemetery and get to the Garden of Gethsemane at the bottom. It was great spending time walking around these areas and experiencing the different sights on offer. But as an angler, I couldn't get that huge Galilean lake out my mind. And as I stood gazing at the magnificent artwork up on the ceilings, I could only imagine what was below the surface of this massive body of water. In my suitcase, I'd managed to fit the bare essentials and tucked away the smallest rod and reel I could find. A little telescopic Shimano STC paired with a tiny Shimano 1000 Biomaster would have to do the job and have accompanied me on a few trips in the past. My tackle box would be this film canister in which I stored some of the tiny bits of end tackle. A packet of micro-barbed size 16 hooks, a few split shot, 2 tiny leads, 2 of the smallest floats I could find, 1 feeder and a couple of swivels was all I was going to take. I managed to fit a small pan net head in my camera bag and managed to squeeze in a small broken telescopic net handle to attach to it. Knowing that I only had a couple of hours to fish, I had to set up really quickly, not really assessing how I was going to fish or what tactics I would employ. I knew nothing of the lake itself, other than that I was excited to fish it, and the only bait I had was a couple of bread rolls taken from the hotel breakfast buffet. I decided I'd start fishing using the feeder on the bottom on a free running setup. This was tied to about 1.5 foot of 8-pound fluorocarbon, tied to one of the Drennan size 16 microbarb hooks. I couldn't be fussy with the bait, so I squeezed a tiny pinch of bread flake on the hook and I packed the feeder with some wet mashed bread. The first cast in any new lake is always an exciting one, but to be able to fish in a place like this is just surreal. With the rod out and fishing, I was finally able to take in some of the surroundings, knowing that I wasn't wasting any time. Knowing that with a lake so big I would likely have to build the swim somewhat, I started by putting a few feeders of bread in, leaving it about 10 minutes each time. I really wasn't expectant, but within about half an hour I started to get some good knocks on the rod tip. These bites didn't seem to materialise, but I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of life below the surface. As I stared through the water layers, I started to notice a few small shoals of fish. I had to make my mind up pretty quickly if I was going to persist and fish on the bottom or try and target these fish swimming in the upper layers. I decided that as I was getting knocks, I would leave it for a little while longer, give it another 20 minutes or so to see if any of these bites materialised. Not much happened, so I decided it was now or never. I was going to switch to one of the little floats I had and see if I could tempt one of these fish on slow sinking bread. Despite not knowing what fish they were, I continued to break up small pieces of bread and squeeze them in the water, crushing them up so they would sink slowly around my hook bait. Despite flicking around for the last bit of remaining time I had and keeping my eyes peeled on the water, I just couldn't tempt anything into feeding. I did a bit of research following the session and I found out that these were tilapia, one of the main fish in the lake, and also known as St. Peter's fish. As well as this, they have 3 types of barbel, sardine, and I did read on a forum that there are carp and catfish in here as well. With hindsight vision being 2020, I wish I'd stayed fishing on the bottom of the lake. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have switched up to the float, or would you have continued to fish on the bottom, or done something completely different entirely? Let me know. With my allotted time on the lake being over, I was rather gutted that I hadn't caught, but still really grateful that I had the opportunity to fish somewhere like this. Our final stop was to a place called Haifa, on the northern tip of Israel. One of the famous sights in this area is the Baha'i Gardens, viewed from the Louis Promenade. This brilliant vantage point looks out over the gardens, across the port and into the Mediterranean Sea. As the trip came to an end, I was pleased to have been able to experience something like this. I certainly wouldn't advise going right now. If you do ever get the chance to visit Israel, then I can definitely recommend it. As I headed home, I was still a bit frustrated that I didn't manage to get that catch photo, but knowing that I'd have memories that would stay with me for a lifetime.